So today we have Adam Ortwine on the left, Matt Whetstone on myself. Our names are kind of funny to spell, so we got the phonetic spelling there for you. We are architects by trade. We are what's known as design application specialists for Corgan. And essentially what that means is we take any of the applications that our users use day to day, whether that's Revit, AutoCAD, Bluebeam, the Adobe Creative Suite, and we try to find ways to make them more efficient and just make their jobs easier. So you can see Adam and I are pretty much the same person, small difference of the alma mater there. Like I said, we are design application specialists for Corgan. We are an architecture and interior design firm ranked in the top 10 nationwide. 85% of our work is with repeat clients, which we're really proud of. And we've been around almost 80 years now, so we're excited to move into the 9th decade with Dynamo at our back. So just a quick preview of what we want to cover today, a little intro into what our philosophy has been with Dynamo. We've been working with it a little over 6 months now, so we really wanted to take a conceptual approach as to how we'll use this tool and talk a little bit about how we organize ourselves within the application. And then we want to get into some actual demonstrations of how we use Dynamo, what we use it for, both everyday, quick and simple things, and one more involved application. So the core Dynamo philosophy was structured by asking ourselves a few questions. First, the potential uses of Dynamo. I'm sure you guys have gotten into the application, you've used it a little bit, and the first thing, at least for us, that we noticed is it's overwhelming, the amount of potential that you get with this visual programming interface. You're really digging down into the Revit API, and you can do absolutely anything. So one of the first questions to ask yourself is, what do you want to do with it? And what is that intent, and how does that align with your design process? Corgan has been around, like I said, for 8 decades now. We have a very ingrained design process, and we didn't want to rock the boat by introducing visual programming, and we really wanted to use this tool to supplement the processes that we already have in place and not redefine how we design with it. So with that, we've decided to call it practical programming or pragmatic programming. What are the uses that you can pull out of Dynamo that you can use to supplement your existing workflows and just make yourself a more efficient architect, interior designer, more efficient design practitioner? So once we started getting into Dynamo, we realized that we had to have some sort of organizational strategy, or everything very quickly turns into spaghetti, ball of yarn, whatever analogy you want to use. So there's a lot of really good work out there on Dynamo organizational strategies. But why? First off, it helps to supplement mentorship, and this is a fairly new tool. It's new in our adoption anyway, and we want to make it easy for other people to follow in our footsteps, to read our graphs, and so we can teach other people the tool itself. Practicing good record keeping, so where we're at in the graph, where it's at in development, if it's new, if there are kinks that need to be worked out, if you need custom packages, you want to be able to have a record of that information so other people can follow it. And finally, legibility, like I said. You don't want to get into the situation where you got the spaghetti, the ball of yarn. You want to be able to know what's going on the graph, what nodes are doing what, so other people can use it. So like I mentioned, a lot of good work going on organizational strategies. This is a snip from a post on dynamobim.org from White Architecture AB. I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced, but they had a really solid strategy for categorizing different operations of Dynamo into different colors and using that as a template for all of their Dynamo graphs. We've seen this utilized a couple times at different conferences. We saw a couple guys at MU using this, so we wanted to use this strategy as a basis for our own organizational strategy. So this is what comes into every new Dynamo graph, and really it's just a copy and paste operation at the moment. But we have a few different things. First off, mentorship. So we want to put a little verbiage in there that's describing what the organizational strategy is for, how things should be organized, so people can take this forward and organize their graphs as such. Record keeping, definitely got to have your name, your version number, who created it. Really critical is what packages are involved in the graph, because you guys probably know if you don't have the correct custom package, then the graph doesn't work, and any custom notes you might need. And finally, legibility. Just making sure everybody knows what the organizational strategy is and why we're utilizing it. And also, definitely want to give credit to White Architecture AB for being the genesis of this strategy. So within legibility, the different groups we have our process, and these are gray. These are typically things that don't need modification. They just manipulate data. They're necessary components of the graph that don't require input. User controls, these are the areas that anybody getting into the graph to manipulate it is going to go to immediately to change things. Input is any information coming from Revit, coming from Excel, coming from external files, anything coming from outside Dynamo that gives us data that we're working with. Output is when we're creating things, whether that's creating geometry in Revit, whether that's creating data in Revit, writing to parameters, or outputting Excel files. Monitor is usually just a watch node. This is if we want to run checks at midpoints throughout the graph. If we want to just check information throughout it, we'll put it in a light blue group to show that we're monitoring that data. At certain points, we may need to point out notes about areas of the graph, so we'll want to put that in a dark blue annotation group. And then finally, work in progress in red. These are just, or pink. These are just going to call out areas of the graph that are still works in progress, maybe things that are a little glitchy and that people should watch out for. So that's Corgan's Dynamo philosophy, kind of how we got into it, how we're approaching the application itself, and we definitely wanted to show you a few of the graphs that we've used. So I'll take you through a few of the more simple graphs, the more just straight pragmatic graphs that help people every day. First is delete imported DWGs. I'm sure you're familiar with the specter of the imported DWG. It's hard to get rid of. You can use things like model review, but this is a nice, simple graph to be able to get rid of those CAD imports quickly. So we can see here we've got a CAD link DWG, also got a CAD import, and this Dynamo graph is very simple. It is literally 2 nodes. We have one node from Bimorph, that's a custom package, and then this is a system node, which is element.delete. So let's grab this back over here. I'll run that graph, and just like that, your CAD import is gone. So this can be a dangerous application. Again, with Dynamo, it's very powerful. You could also modify this to just report your imported DWGs if you wanted to review them first and not do the nuclear delete option. All right, the next graph I want to look at is truncate far clip offset. One of the things that we've seen in our investigation of Revit and processing is that far clip offset can really negatively impact your processing time, your loading time, all of that. So we have a few sections here with far clip offsets that are in the 150 range, probably a little bigger than they need to be. And then we've got 340 elevations over here with 1,000 for their far clip offset. Again, it's really unlikely that we need the far clip offset to be that large. So we wrote a script, a graph, to quickly bring that down to something more manageable. So in our truncate far clip offset graph, it's just a few nodes, again, very simple. We're grabbing all of the views with a far clip, so these are going to be sections and elevations. And then we're just setting a parameter based on a slider that we specify. So maybe we want it to be 15, maybe we want to drag that all the way back to 10. So I'll run that graph. And then let's check our sections. There we go. Looks like we're at 10 across the board. And then we can spot check some of these elevations. Looks like we're all at 10. So again, this is something that is wide-reaching. You could take this graph as a basis and utilize it to maybe you want to call out specific section types, specific elevation types. Only grab those and set the FAR clip. Really, you can do whatever you need to do. The point is that we're just thinking about FAR clip offset, how it affects processing, and using Dynamo to take action on it. The third graph is a little bit more involved. So a little bit of background. The Corgan Revit template, we recently took about a year and rebuilt it. It's really robust. It's got over 560 views pre-placed on 350 sheets. It's a reductive template in the sense that it's very large, and we provide avenues for users to tailor that template down to something they actually need. So in that light, we've provided a lot of existing and demo, both plans, views, sheets, and view templates for people to document their existing and demo conditions. We do have a lot of projects that are only new construction, though. So you can imagine that going through and deleting all your demo sheets, all your existing condition plans, both working and documentation, can take a little while. So we wanted to make a one button click solution that would allow us to quickly remove a lot of that stuff. Won't take you explicitly through the graph, but we're grabbing all the views, finding existing, finding demo, finding the view templates, and then just deleting them. So let's run that graph. Twiddle your thumbs for the appropriate length of time. And if you're watching the project browser over here, we can see we no longer have build existing conditions. That's gone. Our annotation existing conditions are gone. And again, our demo sheets are gone. So with one button click, we've brought this template down to just what they need for new construction. So really useful tool. You just have to put in a little bit of time on the graph development. The fourth pragmatic one we want to show you is changing sheet numbers from A to IA. We have a really great interior architecture section here at Corgan. They do a lot of great work. But right now, with our one template approach, they're currently taking all of their finished plans, all of their furniture plans, and changing the sheet number from A to IA, manually adding an I at the beginning of that. So they asked us if there was a better way to do that, and of course with Dynamo there is. So again, very simple approach. We're finding all of the sheets that begin in A, because again, we don't want to edit the general sheets, and adding an I at the beginning of those. So I'll run this graph, and there's a finicky thing about this graph in that it doesn't complete with one run. You can see it kind of stopped here at IA09. It takes usually 6 runs to get all the way through. Our applications group spoke to Zach Krohn in the Dynamo development with Autodesk about this, and apparently it comes down to there are a few different behind-the-scenes parameters that are associated with sheet number, and Dynamo isn't always sure which one you're writing to. So for that reason, sometimes it's a multiple run approach with some of these things. But now we can see that after a few runs, all of our A's are changed to IAs. We'll go up the list to our proposed floor plans. All of those are IAs. Our site plan is correct. Everything is looking good. So again, just a few runs and hours of work saved on the sheet numbering. Okay, the last one for me anyway is view name find and replace. And this isn't just limited to view names. This can really be anything that you want to change in Revit. But view names we found are something that we get requests for quite often. So how we've built our template, we have overall floor plans and segment floor plans. Pretty common concept, right? So let's expand a couple of these. So we can see our sheet proposed reflected ceiling plans. We've got our overall, and then our parents with all of our proposed segment plans. Parent, all of our proposed working plans. And this propagates throughout the rest of the template. But let's say we have somebody that really doesn't like the term parent. So let's change that. We're going to enter the current view name. So, and this doesn't have to be the entire view. We have a really robust numbering structure, a nomenclature structure here. So we just want to change the word parent. And then what are we changing it to? Desired view name. Let's make that partner in child rearing. Be very PC about it. So we're going to enter those view names, feed that into the view parameter, and then write that to the parameter itself. So let's hit run. All right, now we have our obnoxious view name, partner in child rearing throughout. So we can click on a couple more of these through our proposed work. All right, looks like everywhere we had parent, we now have partner in child rearing. So I think that will do it for me on the very quick and simple Dynamo applications. Again, it's really about the pragmatic use, making either yourself or your users more efficient. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Adam Ortwine, and he's going to take us through one of our more robust applications of Dynamo.
All right. Thank you very much, Matt. Really excited to be sharing this stuff with you guys today. In fact, I dressed up for the webinar, so hope you enjoy. So today, Matt took you through some sort of one-off tasks where you could hit a button and accomplish a task. One of the things that I've learned about Dynamo, we both learned really, is as you start thinking about things in Dynamo, you can't really stop thinking about it. And so I think this next example showcases where you could really stockpile things that you could do in Dynamo and just keep going with it and start thinking about what else could I pull, what else could I change and manipulate. So just a little bit of background about what we've been doing the last couple of years. We were getting a lot of requests and troubleshooting from teams that were generally having vague issues with their models, like my model is slow, my model is crashing, my model is too big. And we found very quickly that we needed to be able to nail this down to a diagnosable set of symptoms, which really we were kind of limited to manual input at that time because we just didn't know about Dynamo and what it was capable of. So what you're looking at now is a OneNote document, which if you're not using OneNote, I strongly recommend you do. It's a very strong collaborative tool, and after the webinar, if you have questions, I'm happy to talk about how we use it. But each one of these inputs is just a manual field. It's a highlight and retype. It's taking snips of the model, citing different areas where we felt we needed some, some attention or some diagnosis, like how are your work sets, going back to some of the things that Matt was modifying and manipulating with some of the graphs he was showing you. But every time we got into a model and we did a project of 2 or 3 different models, it could take a full day, maybe even longer, and by the time we did all the models of a large project, the data we were giving them was so irrelevant because it was 3 weeks down the line and it didn't really apply to where they were. So once we dove into Dynamo, what you see these checkboxes on the left here, those indicate checks that we were able to input in Dynamo, and then we just kept going with it. We kept taking it as far as we possibly could. So this is the graph that we were able to concoct. Now, I like starting with this view because I love the way the spaghetti sort of fans out of the wires, and it kind of gives you a little insight as to how much is in here. It's also organized by, white architect and AB's strategy, which is really critical for something to this scale, and you'll see why in a minute. So I'll just zoom extents to give you the full idea here. Sorry, the webinar thing is blocking my view, so I will pull it down. There we go. So if I zoom extents, this is really the full scope of the ever-growing model health assessment graph. And I think the first reaction when somebody looks at this is, wow, that's a lot. It's pretty daunting. And I think it kind of seems like what any Dynamo might look like to somebody of any scale once they first start using it. But we accomplished this the same way that one would eat an elephant, which was one bite at a time. We started with the first graph we had, we copy-pasted it in here, and we just kept going with the previous OneNote as our guide. And even at this scale, you can see how we're implementing the organization strategies and how it's sort of lining up all the data. So on the left-hand side, it's the input, it's the things that we're pulling from Revit. Just right of that is the gray, which is the process, and that's sort of we're taking the data and querying it or manipulating it, creating lists in order to reorder it, order it, etc. And that plugs into blue, which is a watch node for each one of these lines of data, because as we run these things, it's critical to make sure that before sending it to another document, it's showing what we want to show, or it's showing something at all. Sometimes we get a bunch of nulls when we run it. That's just to be expected. So we want to make sure that the data is looking the way we want it to before plugging it in. And then on the far right, of course, well, before I say that, you can see the green here for the user input, and that's where you'll make any sort of changes to the document, which really just amount to repathing the file path to your specific model health assessment location. So the line on the right, the orange, is the output, and this is where we're taking advantage of Dynamo's capability and association with other software applications, namely in this case Microsoft Excel. So just to take you through sort of one of the graphs here, one of the things we like to check for is do you have a collection of plan views or otherwise that are of a certain scale or smaller and with fine detail level on, because at some scales fine detail level isn't doing anything for you but just cramming your video memory and really over processing things. So in this case we're isolating views with the fine detail level. We're removing any perspective views right here. Then we're cross-referencing the fine detail level with the 1/4 inch view scale and higher, or lower, I guess. And then we're querying the views for their view names so we can actually have a set of data to produce. So once we pull that list, we'll come up with a number of views and all of their names. And then that will be sent over here to a very handy node called Excel Write File. The inputs of this node are file path, so what Excel file are we writing to? Sheet name, what worksheet in the file are we writing to? Which row are we populating the data in? And then which column? And then what is the data? So really, where's the file, what page, and then where do I start? We wanted to simplify this process. Instead of creating something that was really well laid out and everything had a very specific cell to go to, we basically, I'll jump over and show you in a minute, but we basically dedicated a tab to the data that listed things vertically in a column. So every piece of information got its own column. And what that allowed us to do was lay out any other tabs in the workbook to reference that data any way we wanted to without manipulating the data in here, because it can be time consuming to go through and identify the start row and the start column for every piece of information. So some of these spaghettis that start to join up into into these nodes right up here, you can see, and I've labeled their association here. One of them is the model health assessment file path, and you'll want to change that, make a copy of the template every time and relocate it to another location because you don't want to overwrite your template with a bunch of data. Which sheet name, I've added it to ampersand data ampersand just to make sure that I know which which tab is which. And then start row is always going to be the same. We're always going to put the and if you've used Dynamo enough, you'll know that 0 is actually 1 and 1 is actually 2. So we're putting, I have a header line and I have the data line, so it's all populating on the same one. And then this is where I'm identifying each column, and those plug into the start column inputs in those nodes. So we're actually checking 53 pieces of information with this. And that may seem like a lot, and it is. So it takes really an understanding of organization of your Dynamo graph to know where everything is and to know where to put new information. But when I run this, it runs, depending on where I'm pulling the model from geographically, anywhere between 2 and 10 minutes. So it's really not a lot of time to get this much of a report. So without further ado, I'll show you what we actually get from an Excel standpoint when we run this graph on a model. So this was the data tab that I previously mentioned. Like I said before, we have a header line up here, and then all the data sort of populates vertically, and you can kind of see that in something like AL column. It just goes on for a couple hundred cells. So you really want to give it enough enough range so it doesn't overwrite any of the other data. So once we put this together, it's all about referencing in the rest of the document. So at first we created a detailed report for the people who are a little more technical, laid things out in a nice grid, and allowed for everybody to understand this is the model name, here's the project number, here's how big the model is. We wanted to give some hierarchy to the information we thought was more important. And then we sort of summarized some of the things over here for everybody to look at. But this is definitely more of a technical view that doesn't appeal to everybody. So from a graphic standpoint, we wanted to give this the same treatment as we gave our template. So this is sort of the summary page that we offer folks. And if you've ever worked with radar charts, they're really interesting. Each spine or each corner that goes into the center is a check or a piece of information that has a value. So really what's going on here is the data from the data tab is being filtered into this radar chart data tab. That's referencing all of that data, and then we're scaling the point system that we're assigning to these to the spine of each respective piece of data. So you can kind of see it here for the analysis portion. And just to back up for a second, so one of the things that we really plug in our firm is whatever you do in BIM kind of falls into 4 categories: analyze, collaborate, document, and model. And so that's a concept we want to keep pushing and keep at the forefront of conversation. So that's why it's organized like this. So anyway, so a lot of these use lookup functions and reference functions and nested if statements to give things a percentage, and then the percentage directly applies to how it charts on the radar chart. So for example, you can tell that number of 3D views is somewhere around under 50% or so, and I can see it here. It says 50%, so it charts about halfway up the spine. Central file name is in great shape, so it gets 100%. It goes all the way to the outer rim. So what you're striving for in a radar chart is full coverage. You don't want any white spaces or uncovered spaces. So to zoom back out to the summary, Each one of these is a link to their respective BIM variable. So if we jump into something like collaboration, we can see that there are points possible on the right and points earned on the left. And really, we took an opportunity to decide what we wanted to say about each one of these categories. So yes, you have file size, but what are you saying about file size? Do you want it to be above a certain range or below a certain range? And what are the points that we would give you if you or what points could you contribute to your overall health with a nice size model versus maybe a bloated model? And this concept sort of applies to everything that we check. It's not really just citing like points. It's saying something about, project phases. You have this many, but how many did you dedicate to demo? Well, you don't need demo phases. Demo is a function of new construction. So I think this really demonstrates how you can take something primitive like observed data, you can match it with Dynamo graphs, and then you can plug that information into an Excel report, and really with the push of a button and some setup and infrastructure in the Dynamo side, you can give folks basically a 10-minute report of their model that gives them areas to look in. Where can we focus our attention so that our model health can go back up? Not necessarily that they get, they hover over this number, but where can we show our attention and get our model back to working ability? So with that, I will jump back over to the PowerPoint and finish up our presentation. So a couple things in closing to remember. This is what we've shown you today are the ways that we use Dynamo. We've made the stance at this point anyway not to dabble in generative design, but more to supplement our practice and guide people and maybe take care of some things that they may not know are underlying issues. And this is a very quick way to really mine deep into the model and pull out that information that could give you some insight. So really tailor this process to what's appropriate to you, proportionate to the size of your firm, proportionate to the projects you have in Revit, and dedicate whatever time you can to it, because it really does pay dividends in the end. And so if you were looking for a starting position, really grab the low-hanging fruit, kind of like the things that Matt showed you in the beginning. Don't necessarily strive for the robust model health assessment right off the bat unless you're really confident about it, because even just changing, A to IA on the sheets saves, an hour of time every project, and over, a number of projects over time, that in turn saves hours and hours, and hours equals money, as we know. So a little bit goes a long way. And then, of course, let that be your starting point, and reach for the other fruit too. I think you'll do this naturally, but if you grabbed onto Dynamo and you really delve in and start to use some of the basic nodes, then I think you'll realize that you'll frame your mind that way and think about, what else can I automate in Dynamo? What else can we save time doing that's maybe repetitive? So with that, here's our contact information, and if anybody has any questions, please submit them and we'll address them now.
All right. Thanks, Matt and Adam. We did get a couple of questions in, if you guys want to address a couple of them real quick.
Sure.
So the first question we got was, if a project had, so this was at the beginning when Matt was talking about renaming some of the sheets. If a project has the A and IA sheets, can you define which sheets get the I? Like, instead of just doing en masse the whole project, can you be selective with that?
Sure. So like I said up top, there's a bunch of different ways to do anything in Dynamo, and you just have to find that differentiating factor. So if you're wanting to edit just a select number of sheets, You just have to identify that factor and find a way to isolate it. So, for example, what we did with the sheets in the first example is we found only sheets that begin with A, because we didn't want to do any of the presentation sheets. We didn't want to do any of the general sheets. And we just found those with A and then added an I at the beginning of them. So similarly, you could isolate sheets with the discipline parameter. You could isolate sheets with a parameter that you define yourself. Really, you could do it any number of ways.
Awesome. So the next question on the model health assessment, the question is, how do you handle the garbage in, garbage out? They're having a tough time getting users to fill the drawn by and checked by parameters properly. So you kind of seem to be relying on the input being relatively clean. And actually people seem to be, you seem to be relying on people actually filling in that data.
Sure. Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think that we've factored that into some of the Excel checks that we have. So if we're not getting data back, I think we set up a lot of parameters like project number and project name with default values that we know ourselves, like enter project number. If your project number cites as enter project number, I think we're pretty well aware that you haven't typed in your project number, and we have point systems set up in the model health assessment to account for that. And you can do that with nested if statements, looking for certain text or something to that, citing the values that you're looking for. It's really just knowing that that's the tendency of folks, is really just to dive in. And, on the other end of it, we spent a year putting a template together that set up startup steps for everybody at the very beginning of the project that directs them towards the proper setup of a model. So we factored in what should be populated by the beginning of a project and filtered that into our model health assessment. So quick way to police it.
Very nice. Okay, next one is does your system count down for having or take into account for having in-place families being used or detail lines and other things like that?
We're still working on some of the content. That was worth mentioning too, is this graph, any of our graphs, really none of them are perfect. They're always works in progress, which is why we have that organization designation of work in progress. We're always working on these. There's things that need to improve. Sometimes I'll run a model health assessment and it'll fill everything out, and then I'll run it again on another model and things will be blank for some reason. So there's always follow-up to do with Dynamo and tinkering with it. As far as in-place models, I think that's a great check, and I'll probably be adding that one. I just haven't really gotten to the loadable family content information other than what families are unused. And then what was the other category?
Oh, like detail lines.
Oh, detail lines, yes. There is a number of model health, number of annotation elements, and I cross-reference that with the number of sheets to sort of give sort of an average number of elements per sheet based on some averages that we've seen in the firm so far. And anything above a certain number implies that you're over detailing things. But to your point, I think that's a great idea to input filled regions and detail lines alike into the count. And if it's above a certain number, absolutely, it's a deterrent, or it's adversely affecting your model for sure.
Cool. Okay. All right. Next one is, can you elaborate on why you chose the subtractive method of creating your project template rather than an additive method? Probably not Dynamo related, but they just wanted a better understanding as to the super large template method.
Matt, I think you should take this one.
Yeah, sure. So there's a few different drivers for that. For one, we have a number of different market sectors here at Corgan. I think we have at least 6 defined market sectors. And we have a relatively small design applications group. We have Adam and myself, as well as another colleague, and then our design apps manager. And we really can't manage 10 or 12 different templates, 2 for every market sector. So what we tried to do is give everybody a template that works for the vast majority of projects, and then with that, pair it with a really vetted strategy that allows them to identify exactly what they need in the template and use the tools that we provided in the template, like pre-made schedules, to call that down. That startup process that we've established typically only takes about 20 minutes for a project, and over the course of months or even years for some of our aviation projects, that 20 minutes really pales in comparison to all the time that they would have to invest in infrastructure creation otherwise. So again, the main driver is creating all of that infrastructure on the front end for people so that they can use their time to do what they should be doing, which is designing.
And it's worth noting too that with something that stockpiled, people tend to think of it as bloat or heavy model if your size gets up to be too big, starting with a certain size. But there's a real difference between starting with information that's working for you that you get to tailor into your own project, or having a model that bloats to a certain size and is getting filled with families that aren't really doing anything for you. Maybe you're just linking in things that aren't cleaned. I mean, one is a workflow issue that stagnates over time, and one is really just solid information that you get to trim down to what you need.
All right, 2 more, and then we'll call it. Does your module remove all AutoCAD elements and line types imported by Revit?
Actually, that's a great question. The node, as I'm familiar with it, identifies the CAD import itself and just that import instance. I'm not so sure about layer types. Adam, do you know?
Yeah, I think what they're asking is when you explode an import, is there a way to get rid of the line types that are coming in? And I think the best answer to that is to not explode imports in your live model. Don't do it. If you need a detail, which at times we all do, I would bring it into a blank file, explode it there, change your line types, and then insert that view into your file, so you're not getting any of those line types from layers, which can number into the hundreds or thousands sometimes.
Yeah. I think to your point, Adam, the best solution there is just to not use poor CAD practices. As foot and mouth as it seems, it's not a lot of good ways to clean up after that damage has been done that we know of.
No going back.
Right. All right. And have you guys rolled out Dynamo company-wide? And if you have, how do you get other people to use it?
So I would say, and like to hear what Adam has to say, it's definitely been a grassroots effort. It started with just Adam and I trying to find solutions to quick, pragmatic problems. But as we've demonstrated some of these things, as we've given presentations about the template and included snippets on Dynamo, we do have curious people asking us, what is visual programming? How are you guys using this? And for me personally, I think for Adam as well, a lot of it comes down to just one-on-one conversations with the people that are actually interested in doing it. Once you get them, get their feet wet, get them moving, they can talk to other people and start to integrate it into the studios.
Right. Yeah. They advertise Dynamo as graphic interface for programming, but it's still very much programming, especially to somebody who just, like Matt and I don't have that kind of background, so we had to really, be, really grind at it to understand it and get into it. I think and because of that, it appeals to a very small percentage of people who also have a lot of project responsibilities and not a lot of time to dedicate to learning Dynamo. So we've even talked about sending a cryptic invite out to the firm and saying, if you know what the attached DYN file is for, then meet us at this location. Then we'll have kind of a Dynamo brain trust or something within the firm where we can geek out about it. But it definitely doesn't appeal to everybody.
Yeah, and I think along with that, it's one of those applications where there's no substitute for just sitting down and playing around with it. So if the intent of the question is how do I get people to adopt this, definitely create some graphs, show some stakeholders that you're actually getting results, show them that it's going to be beneficial, and try to have a class and sit down one-on-one with people.
All right. And finally, is it possible to share any of the spreadsheets or notes that you guys have done?
Sure.
Yeah, I think we can. We'll definitely verify with the powers that be, but I don't see why. Dynamo's it's a great community. If you haven't been out to dynamobim.org, everybody's really friendly, really transparent. So we'll get as much up there as we can.
Yeah, it's worth noting too that we do use a lot of custom nodes and packages that are already out there. So without users installing those, they're going to have a hard time running some of the graphs. So we'll try to list out some of the packages that we included in model health assessment and the other graphs as well.
Awesome. So yeah, I would say if you guys are willing to share any of that stuff, send it on over to us, and we will make it available along with this recording.